Hey everyone, Tony D and Little Joan here with a hot take on education. I'm pretty big on the topic of education, having worked in the school system here in New Jersey a little while. Know a few things, I feel like I do. I'm not an educator by trade. I just was in the mix a little bit and I kind of saw some stuff. Yeah, yeah, I did. I did. You want to fight me over it, Joan? You want to fight? Yeah. But Trump has announced a commission to further patriotic education, which is a pushback to a lot of the stuff that's getting pushed now, which a lot of it's it's the Black Lives Matter, John. Black Lives Matter and their Marxist nonsense. But let's read little bit from the Hill. President Trump on Thursday described Americans' heritage and history as under assault from the left, decrying anti-racism teachings and cancel culture while announcing plans for a new commission to promote patriotic education in U.S. schools. This isn't a bad idea. It's a little late, unfortunately. We're going to probably be dealing with the Marxists for a while because, man, they've just been lied to for so long. And so many of these teachers, really, it goes to the teachers. So many of these teachers they're very left, and they're kind of obsessed with politics. They can't even conceive of a world where someone on the right might have a point, even, unless it kind of agrees with them. Like, they're okay with people on the right who agree with them. Like, they'll always point to John McCain. Oh, John McCain, he was pretty reasonable. John McCain, in my view, was an opportunist, and he'd flip. He once famously, he put together a bill in Congress, which then he lobbied against and voted against. Now, people sometimes do that in Congress, but this one was particularly egregious because McCain really went to town to get the damn thing on the docket, and then he turned around and killed his own bill. It's like, you want to talk about a waste of time. It's because it's a lot of political posturing that goes on in Washington, and McCain was famous for that. He really was. He wasn't a guy that people in Arizona said, "Oh yeah, that guy really represents me." And he was a senator from Arizona. Keep in mind, he was a rich guy who moved to Arizona to take it over. And, at the end of the day, he sort of became the de facto transition because the Democrats have been trying to turn Arizona blue for a lot of years. So this is a real problem in education. But people who haven't been to schools recently, who don't actually see how they operate, they just assume things. A lot of people just assume things, like they assume common sense prevails everywhere. I guess you'd call that an optimism bias. They assume that most people, sure, they do things differently, and once in a while things go off the rails, but in general, things are operated properly. The reality is, schools under previous administrations have been so centralized in the federal government that the person who gets a hold of them, gets a hold of that power, can steer the entire nation's schools, not just a few of them now. And you'll remember, or some of you older folks might remember, you older folks, like me, that back in the day you had Kansas City, I think it was, who wanted to teach creationism. Some of the more religious sections of the country wanted to teach creationism. Oh, no, said the Democrats. You can't have that. You watch. Another prediction. When the pushback comes on this, what people on the left will say is states need to control their own schools so we can teach what we want to our children. You watch. They'll say exactly what people on the right were saying. And, they're right. Those hypothetical people are right. And so are the non-hypothetical people. You should have the right to have your kid taught how you'd like to teach them. The thing is, we're all paying for it because public schools are a public thing. So that's where the problem comes in. If schools were privatized, then no one would care. You could send your kid off to, leftist Academy U and let them learn all the dumb crap you wanted, and somebody on the right could send their kid to a religious school and let them become uber religious. You could send your kid to any school you wanted if it was privatized. But of course, the people on the left don't want it privatized because they would have no control over it. Then everybody would be learning all kinds of things that they, And keep in mind, the Republicans were about control too. They're just not in that position right now. They're not the corrupt ones now. It's the Democrats. They're the ones losing their power and desperately trying to cling to it. So, looking at the article, in a speech delivered in somber tones at the National Archives Museum, Trump painted a dramatic and dark portrait of an effort by liberals to indoctrinate America's children and repress American values, cultures, and faith. And yeah, there are a million examples on the internet of people, the kid brings home the most insane stuff. Because you have, and it's often women, in these teaching professions who think they know better than the parents. Oh, your parents are just a bunch of ignorant rubes. I know because I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram and Twitter and I'm part of Black Lives Matter and I virtue signal all day long, and so should you. That's the kind of people. It's not so much that they're obsessed with Marxism. They've become indoctrinated because it's trendy right now. Back in the Bush era, oh my God, people couldn't wave the flag enough. It was sickening. People would run around like, oh, support the troops, support the troops. Like, yeah, calm down. They worshiped the ground they walked upon. Now the trend's gone completely the other way. It's like, oh, America sucks. All these people needed to chill out. The same people who complain about America right now would have 20 years ago been the same people who would have been waving an American flag saying, I'm not eating French fries, I want American fries. Remember that? It's weak-willed people. They're sheep. They're sheep, or sheep-like. And they go with the flow. Right now the flow says, no more. No more America. And there are people who are hardcore who really do want to teach Marxism. They do indoctrinate people, whether they realize it or not. And you can't run a country when you're teaching the next generation. Oh, this country that you live in, it sucks. You should tear it down. Like, you can't do that. I mean, you might as well just burn it down yourself if you're going to teach the next generation to do that. It's partly what we covered in Wokistan. The idea that with each generation in college, it was more about college, they just keep teaching people, well, you're not a real intellectual unless you've been out there on the streets protesting something. And so it's just generation after generation of these college kids being taught, well, you're not really doing anything unless you're protesting. And have you met college kids? I have. And I remember meeting the ones back in the 80s and going, God, these people are stupid. They're just slightly older teenagers. That's all they are. And most of the time, they're just trying to hook up and get drunk and look cool. Very few of them are actually involved. It's more about virtue signaling for everybody, not just the girls. Although the girls, man, they love the virtue signal. They love it. And social media has exacerbated that to absurd points. And Twitter especially is guilty of that. So what you need to do is go back to the old system. And the old system was very simple. You taught U.S. history in school. It was mandatory that you take it. You learned about civics. I was in the generation that it was just starting. The progressives were kind of starting this experimentally take some of it out and move it around a little bit. So I got some of it. Like I had a class, we had I guess it was a history section. It was considered social studies. By then they had changed it to social studies. And it was divided into 4 marking periods, our school year. And each marking period was a different sort of subgenre of civics. So like one was called consumerism, which I thought was a really useful class. It taught us how to balance a checkbook and, you know, how bills are paid, like, you know, real practical sort of normal everyday things, you know, some stuff about taxes. But I remember specifically I forget the name of the teacher I had, and she was a nice woman, but she would try not to, but she would slip in her political opinions, right? You could hear her mutter under her breath, you know, yeah, taxes are great, you know, unless you're a Republican, like that kind of thing, and that was wrong of her. Looking back on it, I mean, at the time, I just agreed with her. I'm like, yeah, screw those Republicans, they're a-holes. But you know, looking back on it, that was something she should not have done. It's technically illegal. You're not supposed to, you know, imprint your political views onto a classroom. But, you know, when people feel self-righteous and they feel so right, they'll do it because, well, yeah, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm right. I know I'm right. I feel that I'm right. It's just basic common sense that the country you live in teaches the history of that country, whether you live in this country or any other. I mean, obviously, in Canada, you want to teach Canadian history. In France, you'd want to teach French history. I mean, why wouldn't you? And you certainly wouldn't go to Canada and say, okay, semester 1 of Canadian history, we're going to learn how sucky Canada is and how we should burn it to the ground. I mean, you'd be like, what? Are these people trying to commit suicide? So, you know, Trump is pretty bombastic, and so this is a little bit on the nose, but I could see it happening. You know, it's gonna have to, something's gonna have to happen in that area, and we need to get away from things like the 1619 Project and BLM. Because all they're doing is teaching children, oh, you know, you got a problem. Well, the first thing you do is go out in the streets and protest. It's like when the school shootings happened and then they were like, oh, everybody go out and protest. Teenagers aren't ready to protest anything. They're just learning about our history. And if you're going to give them this slanted history from a very left perspective, that's just going to cause all sorts of problems. There's a reason why people in this country, when they're young, they tend to be on the left, and as they get older, they tend to go more right. Because, you know, if you feel that you've been lied to in school, when you eventually learn what really happened, or you learn the full scope of whatever it is, you get pissed off. You're like, wait a minute, you didn't tell me all this. Why was this hidden from me? And you feel betrayed. I mean, I felt that way a little bit with Abe Lincoln. When I read books on Abe Lincoln, I thought, man, I didn't know half this stuff. So when you look into history, and look, and there are other things too. You know, who was it? I want to say Noam Chomsky. Was it Noam Chomsky? Somebody did like a comic book about the history of America they didn't want you to hear kind of thing. And it was all about, you know, American atrocities. And I read that too and went, you know, I mean, I'm an anti-war guy, so, you know, it greatly interests me. But this is why you can't have censorship, right? You need everything out there. You need to be able to tell the kids the whole deal. You don't just tell them, well, here are 6 elements of history. We'll tell you 3 of them because those are the 3 that won't hurt you. You know, mentally, you know, that we don't want to scar you. Some people might be offended. So we'll just tell you we'll just give you the highlights of 3 of them. No, you have to tell them all the deal, you know, depending on their age. Obviously, kids, you know, who are too young to understand, but certainly by the time you're a teenager, you should be learning real American history and world history. And, you know, history is interesting. There's lots there. It's not a particularly hard subject. People like it a lot. There are very few people I know who don't like history. But when you have people, and understand, on the left side of politics, on the extreme left, there is this idea of destroying history or rewriting it. And you have to be wary of that because, and it's not every single teacher, but there are some hardcore a-holes out there who rationalize it. They go, well, maybe I'll just give them this impression, you know, maybe I'll just, and they've been lied to too. So sometimes they actually believe some of this, shall we say, alternate history. And I just did that report the other day about how, again, I can't say it, but the event in World War II that millennials and Gen Z have seemed to have forgotten. So, you know, this is a sword that cuts both ways. We need real education, and American history in America is important. There's just no getting around it. You need to know your own history. And it sounds corny, but those who do not know their own history are doomed to repeat it. We're repeating it right now. This is a repeat of, well, not totally, but in the 60s. I mean, these are like the 60s riots. Only instead of, you know, hippies, we've got these like Bolshevik revolutionaries who they don't understand what they're doing. And, you know, they think they can just commit these crimes and then go home. And for a while they have. And now they're going to jail. So let's educate people better. I'm for better education. And, you know, I don't know if this particular thing is going to work, but the fact that Trump addresses this issue at all is a huge step in the right direction. It's time to get back to U.S. history in our schools. Simple as that.